The government hunts mythical creatures and turns them into weapons against its enemies. I'm a retired Army Special Forces operator with 2 decades of experience under my belt. The first 10 years of my service were spent with the Scout Rangers, conducting deep jungle reconnaissance, covert missions, raids, hostage rescues. Basically, all the things you'd expect from an elite unit like the SR. I won't waste time telling those stories. They're the same war tales you've probably heard before. Sneaking behind enemy lines, staying undercover for weeks, hitting enemy camps hard and fast. Instead, let's skip to the part I know you're really curious about, my second decade in the field. For 10 years, I served in a unit tasked with tracking down mythical and paranormal entities, yes, actual creatures out of folklore, and using them in military operations to neutralize threats, both foreign and domestic. Sounds insane, right? I would have laughed if someone told me that back when I was still with the Rangers. But it's not some fringe experiment. Believe it or not, the use of mythical creatures has been part of armed forces doctrine for almost 70 years now, and I doubt they're dropping it anytime soon. It's brutally effective. Yes, the risks are high. When things go wrong, they go very wrong. But those cases are rare enough that they usually fly under the radar. And when collateral damage does happen, say an innocent village caught in the crossfire, it's easy enough to blame it on the local insurgency. That's cold, I know. But that's how the machine works. I could go into detail about the cover-ups and disinformation campaigns used to keep this secret, but that part falls under a completely different special operations group. I don't know much about their internal workings, only that they're good at their job. Damn good. Back to my unit. We were called the Mythical and Paranormal Warfare Operations Group, MPWOG for short, but most of us just called it MPOG. Easier to say in the field. Now I know how it sounds. Utter nonsense. A fairy tale. You're probably thinking I've lost my mind. I wouldn't blame you. Psychological operations have long used myths to scare insurgents. Fake Aswang sightings, eerie noises in the jungle, staged mutilations. But that's just make-believe. What I'm talking about is very real. I didn't believe it myself until I crossed paths with MPOG during one of those rare and deadly accidents I mentioned earlier. That was the day I learned the government doesn't just use fear as a weapon, it uses monsters. It was sometime around 1988. At the time, my Scout Ranger company had been deployed to southern Luzon to support Regional Unified Command 4 in ongoing operations against communist insurgents. For weeks at a time, we patrolled the dense, mountainous jungles of the region, trying to sniff out any trails that could lead us to enemy encampments. With the thick jungle canopy masking everything from aerial surveillance, it fell on us Rangers to do the hunting the old-fashioned way, on foot and up close. It was during one of those night patrols that everything changed. For me, and eventually, for my career. We were moving carefully through the jungle, taking a rarely used path that wasn't marked on any maps. The goal was to search for fresh tracks or any kind of trail that might guide us to an insurgent base. That kind of work was slow and meticulous, but it was exactly what we trained for. And we were good at it. The terrain was typical for the region. Thick trees, wet and slippery ground, and mountain caves flanking us on both sides. The caves were especially concerning. They stared out at us like dark, hollow eyes, any of which could be hiding armed insurgents waiting to unleash a burst of gunfire. From my position near the front of the column, I kept glancing at those openings, ready for the worst. Back then, night vision wasn't exactly standard issue. Even for special forces, NVGs were scarce in the field, so we had to rely on the moonlight, our training, and good old instinct to sense danger in the dark. A few hours into the patrol, my pointman, Private First Class Gomez, suddenly signaled. He'd spotted something ahead. Smoke. I immediately called a halt and signaled my squad to take up defensive positions. Quietly, I crept forward to join Gomez, who was crouched low behind some thick undergrowth. "What do you see?" I whispered, dropping beside him. He nodded toward a large tree up ahead. "See that big one over there?" When the wind blew earlier and moved the branches, I got a good look at the top. I saw smoke coming from up there. "From the top of the tree?" I asked, narrowing my eyes to scan the area. "You sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "Just wait for the wind." So I waited. A moment later, a strong breeze swept through the jungle, shifting the branches just enough to part the thick canopy. Through the narrow opening, I caught a glimpse of the tree Gomez had pointed out, and there it was, smoke. A faint trail of white smoke rose from the top of the tree, illuminated by the moonlight. It wasn't natural. It looked like it was coming from inside a thick cluster of leaves, like the tree had a hidden chimney. I found it strange. Someone camping at the top of a tree? That didn't make much sense. But I brushed the thought aside. Maybe it was a lookout, I reasoned, an insurgent using the high vantage point as a concealed perch to watch over the area. I'd never encountered anything like it before, but the idea seemed plausible at the time. A big tree like that could offer excellent cover and a commanding view of the terrain below. With that thought in mind, I convinced myself it was probably just some careless sentry who'd either lit a fire or decided to have a cigarette, both foolish moves that gave away his position. Still, it was a promising sign. If they had a lookout this far out, we might be close to a main camp. Motivated by the possibility, I made the call to move the squad forward, hoping to gather more intel. I followed closely behind Gomez, my eyes fixed on the treetop for any sign of movement. The rest of the squad crept along behind us, every man on high alert and ready to react at a moment's notice. Then suddenly, the sound of rustling leaves and creaking branches snapped through the air. I instantly raised my rifle, pointing it toward the large tree ahead. We were just 10 meters away now. My gut told me the insurgent had spotted us and was scrambling to escape. But as I scanned the area, there was no one there. Cursing under my breath, I assumed he'd managed to slip away and was now running back to alert his superiors. That could mean a patrol coming our way, and we were too small a force to hold our ground in a firefight. I started calculating our next move, planning a withdrawal to avoid getting pinned down. But before I could say a word, a voice rang out from our right. "You are not supposed to be here." The voice was deep, old, and eerily calm. It sent a jolt through me. Instinctively, I spun and aimed my weapon toward the source. My men followed suit, weapons raised and fingers tensed on triggers. At first, I couldn't see anyone, but as my eyes adjusted to the shadows, I saw something, or rather, someone that made my blood run cold. In the moonlight stood a bulky, naked figure, his skin so dark he almost blended in with the night. His body was enormous and grotesquely muscular, as if his limbs and torso had been twisted and swollen in unnatural ways. His shape was off, disturbing. Then I looked at his face and froze. Two wide, bone-white eyes stared back at me, full of something I couldn't explain, something ancient, something wrong. For a man who doesn't frighten easily, I was shocked by the raw fear that gripped me in that moment. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why he was so terrifying, but something deep inside screamed at me to run. Still, I fought to keep my composure. Swallowing the fear, I steadied my breath and addressed the figure directly, doing my best to sound in control. "Who are you?" I demanded, my rifle trained squarely on him, finger firm on the trigger. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer, at least not with words. Instead, he let out a deep, raspy laugh, the kind that felt less amused and more mocking. It sent a chill through me. Normally, I get pissed if someone laughed in my face like that. But in this moment, I wasn't angry. I was afraid. Then I saw him move. His hand shifted, reaching for something. "Don't move," I barked. "Hands where I can see them." He didn't listen. In my head, I was already preparing for the worst. Maybe he was reaching for a weapon or a grenade. Acting on instinct, I went to pull the trigger, but nothing happened. I couldn't fire. I tried again, straining every muscle in my finger, but it was like the trigger was fused to the rifle. No matter how much I willed it, my body wouldn't obey. I'd fired my weapon countless times before, hundreds, maybe thousands, but now I was frozen. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. No one else in my squad was reacting either. Not one shot fired, not a sound, and I knew my men. Any one of them would have opened fire the moment that figure made a suspicious move. Yet all of them stood still, locked in place, weapons raised, but motionless. I realized I could still move my head, so I glanced to my left and right. My squad mates were all like statues, eyes wide with fear, fingers frozen over their triggers just like mine. Their faces were tense, panicked, mirroring the fear surging through me. Some of them tried to mask it with anger, muttering curses under their breath, but it was clear. We were all trapped, and none of us understood how or why. I stayed silent. Cursing wouldn't help. I forced myself to focus. Then I saw what he had reached for. It wasn't a weapon. It was a cigarette, thick, hand-rolled, already lit. He brought it to his mouth and took a long drag, letting the smoke swirl lazily in the air. The acrid scent drifted toward us. Then he looked over at each of us and smiled. It wasn't a human smile. His mouth stretched wide, far too wide, revealing a row of teeth as white and unnatural as his glowing eyes. "I'm not supposed to let anyone pass through this trail," he said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. Then he stepped forward. "None of you should be here." We were still frozen, trapped in place and helpless. The strange man began moving again, this time walking straight toward one of my men, Private First Class Dominguez. I watched, powerless, as the figure approached him. He stopped in front of Dominguez, flashed that same eerie grin, and exhaled a thick cloud of smoke directly into his face. Dominguez coughed violently, trying to shake off the foul haze. When he recovered, he turned his head slowly to look at the figure, then glanced toward me. "Sergeant," he said, voice trembling, I think he's a Capri." A Capri. The word hit me like a slap. We'd all grown up with the stories. Giant, cigar-smoking creatures said to live in the trees, tricking and tormenting travelers. But hearing about a Capri as a child and seeing what might actually be one standing before you were two very different things. Even staring straight at the figure, a part of my mind refused to accept it. It had to be something else. Maybe a man, an insurgent. Maybe he'd used some kind of airborne chemical agent to paralyze us. That explanation, as far-fetched as it was, still felt more believable than the idea that we were face-to-face with a creature of folklore. I was clinging to that belief right up until what happened next. The man's expression changed. His strange white eyes narrowed on Dominguez. The amusement on his face faded, replaced first by hurt, then by anger. I felt the chill in my blood as he stepped even closer to Dominguez, his face now inches away from the Rangers. "Don't you ever dare call me a Capri!" he roared, voice thundering through the jungle. The sound reverberated around us, shaking the very trees. "You will pay for what you said." Then he turned, scanning each of us slowly, his glare locking with every one of our eyes. "You will all pay for being here tonight," he growled. "None of you are supposed to be here." Before I could even process what he meant, something even more terrifying happened. I felt my hands begin to move, not on their own, not from muscle memory, against my will. I cursed under my breath as I felt my fingers release their grip on my rifle. Then, one hand moved to my sidearm. My heart started pounding. My hand unclipped the holster. I felt my fingers wrap around the grip of my pistol and draw it out. My thumb disengaged the safety. Then my arm began to raise the weapon, slowly, deliberately toward my own head. Panic surged through me. I fought to stop it, trying to wrench control of my limbs back from whatever unseen force was guiding them. "Don't resist it," the voice said again, quieter this time but somehow closer, surrounding me. "Do it. Don't fight back. Let your desire end the pain. No, I refused. I summoned every ounce of willpower I had, shouting silently in my head, trying to freeze my own movements. To my shock, it worked, just barely. The motion of my hand slowed, like it was pushing through water, encountering resistance. Hope sparked in me. I shut my eyes tight, focused on blocking out the voice, trying to drown it out with my own will. And that's when I heard it. 3 gunshots. They rang out sharp and sudden, cutting through the jungle air like a whip. As my senses returned, the world around me sharpened, and then I heard it. 3 solid thuds. I didn't need to look to know what they were. Corporal Villanueva, PFC Gomez, and PFC Ronaldo all carried sidearms. If their hands had been compelled like mine, then those 3 shots meant they had lost the fight. They were gone. Grief threatened to take hold of me, but I couldn't afford it. Not yet. I forced myself to focus, only to be interrupted by the shouts and curses of the others. Dominguez, Hernandez, and Isidro didn't have pistols, but they did carry combat knives, standard issue for covert work. And the image that flashed through my mind, the thought of them turning those blades on themselves, was worse than anything I'd seen so far. Their cries tore through the darkness. I heard them scream. Rage, defiance, fear. They were fighting with everything they had, but the sounds made it clear they were losing. "Join your friends," the Capra said. His voice was like a whisper pressed right into my ear. "It is time to rest now. Let go. Death will be swift and peaceful." Then came the sounds. A flurry of sharp, wet stabs, gurgling, bodies hitting the ground. Each sound drove a knife into my heart. One by one, my rangers fell, brothers in arms, taken by something we never saw coming. And now I was the last one left. My focus shattered, my heart broken. I barely noticed as my hand began creeping the barrel of my pistol closer to my temple. A part of me, the smallest, weakest part, wanted to give in. Maybe the voice was right. Maybe there was nothing left to fight for. But I'm not the kind of man who surrenders. I fought, even if I was losing. Even if the barrel was nearly pressed against my head. I had to resist, just like my rangers had. I owed it to them. I clenched my jaw, closed my eyes, and forced myself to block out the fear, the despair, the sorrow. I reached for that last flicker of strength inside me and focused on taking back control. Then the Capri stepped in front of me. He stared, eyes glowing, his grin wide and unnatural. His presence made it harder to think, harder to resist. I could feel his will pressing down on mine, like a weight I couldn't push off. "Your friends are waiting," he whispered, his tone dripping with false comfort. "What's the point of living without them? Join them! Join them! Join them!" His voice pounded in my head like a drum. The barrel of the pistol was inches from my skull now. I screamed inside, cursed him with everything I had. And that rage gave me a little more time, one more second of defiance. But I was losing. And then, just as the barrel neared its final inch, I felt something change. The pressure on my hand vanished. My muscles slackened. Control returned. My limbs were mine again. Stunned, I looked up at the Capri. He was no longer looking at me, but at something behind me. His expression shifted from smug to fearful. Slowly, he began backing away. Relief flooded my body like cold water. My knees buckled, but I managed to stay upright, barely. The Capri turned to run, clearly trying to escape. But he stopped abruptly, like he'd hit an invisible wall, or someone was standing in his path. Before I could figure out what had stopped the creature, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Instinct took over. I spun around, ready for anything. At first, I thought I was about to face more Capres. But as the dark figures emerged from the shadows, I realized they were smaller and human. The tension in my body eased slightly, though I remained cautious. There were 3 of them, moving swiftly and deliberately through the dark. Dressed in black battle dress uniforms, they blended easily into the night. All 3 had their weapons drawn, yet each one held a hand raised. It was then I noticed what they were carrying. Large bottles filled with a silvery liquid that caught what little moonlight made it through the trees. For a moment, my mind wandered. What was in those bottles? Who were these men? Their gear was unlike anything I'd seen in the regular armed forces. Fully kitted for nighttime combat, they wore night vision goggles, heavy-duty ballistic vests, and chest rigs loaded with rifle magazines and grenades. They reminded me more of American Special Forces than any local unit. That assumption vanished the moment one of them called out to me in Tagalog. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked as he neared. I nodded weakly. Yes, I managed, though my voice trembled. My hands were still shaking from the ordeal. "Good," he replied, sounding genuinely relieved. "You're lucky to be alive." He moved in closer and helped me to the side, guiding me to sit and rest. As I lowered myself to the ground, I caught sight of the scene around me. 6 bodies. My squad. My brothers. They lay motionless, and the sight of them hit me like a hammer to the chest. Grief rose within me, heavy and raw, but I pushed it down, at least for now. I turned my attention back toward the Capre. There he stood, still frozen in place, but he was no longer alone. Another team of black-clad soldiers had emerged from the jungle, fanning out as they advanced with weapons raised. Like the first 3, they too held those strange bottles, silver liquid glowing faintly in the darkness. The Capre hissed, low and guttural, clearly agitated by their approach. But this time there was no arrogance, no menace in its stance. It looked cornered, powerless. The dominance it once held had vanished, replaced by fear. And for the first time I realized that this wasn't just a monster. This was something known to these men, something they dealt with before. Once again, my curiosity flared to life. I wanted to know who these men were and what was in those strange bottles they carried. I stayed seated, observing everything I could, hoping that eventually someone would offer an explanation. Soon, the black-clad soldiers formed a perimeter around the creature, surrounding it in a tight circle. One of them broke away from the group and made his way toward me. As he passed my fallen rangers, he paused for a moment and made the sign of the cross. "I'm sorry about your friends," he said quietly. "I'll have one of my squads recover their bodies once we've secured the target." "You mean that, Kai?" I asked, glancing toward the creature still trapped in the circle. "Yes," he replied, then added with a shake of his head, "but don't call it a Capre. They hate that. What you're looking at is an Agda. Similar, yes, but native only to the eastern Visayas. And unlike Capras, they're far more aggressive, dangerous even. But fortunately, they're easier to control when Mercury's nearby." I looked at him, remembering the bottles. "So that's what was in those containers? Mercury?" He nodded. "Exactly. Mercury weakens them. An Agda can manipulate your mind, twist your will, but if you have Mercury near you, it disrupts their influence, strips them of their power." "Good to know," I muttered, already mentally noting to never go on patrol without some form of Mercury again. But something still didn't sit right with me. His explanation answered what the creature was, but not why it was here. "You said Agda are native to eastern Visayas," I said cautiously. "So what the hell is it doing here, in Luzon?" He looked at me without flinching. "Because we brought him here." His words hit me like a slap. "You brought him here?" I repeated, louder this time, eyes wide. Shock gave way to confusion and anger. "Why the hell would you bring something like that here?" I felt rage bubbling up inside me. My men were dead. They died facing something we never should have encountered. "You're soldiers, right? You're supposed to protect this country, not unleash monsters inside it." At that point, I wasn't even sure who they were anymore. Soldiers? Mercenaries? Agents of some secretive group that hunted and controlled creatures like these? Nothing made sense. "Easy," he said, raising a hand. "It's not like we had much of a choice. The order came straight from the AFP chief. He authorized MPOG to deploy CN-0109, what we call the Agda, believing it would be an effective tool to suppress insurgent activity in this region." I stared at him in disbelief as he continued. It actually worked well the first few nights. He did his job, but the Agda has a habit, mischief, games. He forgot the terms of our deal. He wasn't supposed to touch anyone outside the target group. Targeting your men was a breach of the agreement, and for that I apologize. We should have pulled him out sooner. He sighed, and his next words felt heavier than the rest. This was our first time deploying an Agda. Judging by the outcome, it might be our last. I stared at him, trying to process everything he just told me. Out of all the revelations, one thing lingered in my mind more than anything else. What's MPOG? I asked. That was all the invitation he needed. He began to explain everything about the mythical and paranormal operations group, how they dealt with creatures from folklore, using them in clandestine military missions. He told me he was a lieutenant, part of an elite platoon, trained specifically to handle, deploy, and capture these entities using specialized gear and unorthodox methods. At first, I was skeptical. It all sounded insane. But then again, how could I not believe him? One of the very creatures they controlled had just slaughtered my entire squad. The proof had been right in front of me. In the smoke, the eyes, the bodies. By the time he finished, my entire view of the world had changed. I realized with a growing sense of unease that there were far more dangerous things hiding in the jungles than armed insurgents. The thought terrified me. And yet alongside that fear, there was a strange sense of relief. Relief that an organization like MPOG even existed. Without them, who knew what might be creeping toward our towns, cities, and barrios? Then I asked the question that had been weighing on me since he started talking. Why are you telling me all this? If your unit is supposed to be secret, why reveal so much to someone like me? He turned to face me. In the faint light of the moon, I saw a small grin form on his face. Because I see potential in you, he said. I've never seen anyone resist an Agda's influence before. That kind of mental strength is rare. MPOG only recruits those who survive and resist the unexplainable. You'll be getting an invitation soon. When it comes, I hope you'll say yes. With the final nod, he turned and walked away. A few minutes later, more of the MPOG unit arrived to finish securing the site and contain the Agda. They moved like a practiced machine, efficient and silent. By morning, I was back at our army camp, the same one my squad and I had left the night before. The official story was clean. My squad had been ambushed by insurgents, and I alone had held out until reinforcements arrived. That version of events earned me the Gold Cross. But I knew the truth. And because of that, I couldn't bring myself to feel like I deserved it. That encounter with the Agda was my first experience with mythical creatures and with MPOG. But it certainly wasn't the last. 2 months after that night, I received a formal letter inviting me to undergo the MPWOG qualification process. I accepted, and with that, my second career began, this time in a world far stranger than conventional warfare. Now you're probably wondering what all this has to do with you. Well, the lieutenant I met that night, the one who helped contain the Agda, was your father. He later became my commanding officer, and in time, a close friend. I know you've been asking questions about who your father really was, what he did, and what happened to him in the end. If you truly want answers, I'm willing to share everything I know. But before I do, I need to know you're ready to hear the truth. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't something you'll find in official records. So if you've read this far and you believe what I'm telling you, then write me back. I'll tell you about your father's time with MPOG, his missions, his legacy, and the truth behind what really happened. That's the letter I just received, and I'm not sure what to do next. For the past few months, I've been collecting notes, documents, and personal journals in the hopes of writing a proper biography in honor of my father. He was a decorated scout ranger who rose to the rank of major before dying in an operation so secret that to this day, Neither my family nor I know what really happened. As part of the biography project, I reached out to many of his colleagues, asking if they'd be willing to share their memories of him. Most sent respectful, if ordinary, recollections from their time in the field. But this one was different. At first, I dismissed it. The content sounded unbelievable. Talks of monsters and classified operations involving mythical beings. It felt like something out of fiction. My father was a scout ranger, not some black ops handler of supernatural creatures. But then there was the photo. 2 men in uniform, standing beside a makeshift sandbag bunker. Both had patches on their sleeves marked MPWOG. One of those men was my father. So now I'm torn. Part of me still wants to call this a hoax. But another part can't ignore the feeling that this might be real, that maybe this is the key to finally learning the truth about what happened to him. What do you think? Should I write him back?